Next up, we will have our panel discussion. So I'm going to invite all the presenters back up to the front of the room. I think we have 9 seats ready for 9 people. In no particular order, please do come and join us at the front. We have a couple of questions that we've drafted, plus some we've taken up from Slido, and then we will open up to the room here in London as well. And we have 30 minutes, so hopefully quite a bit of time, and hopefully plenty for people to join in on. The first question we're going to put out there, Bev and I. The shipping and maritime industries are having to adopt new technologies to either meet regulations or to stay ahead. How should we prioritize these, and how can the industry make the best investment decisions? Who's got the mic?
Tristan, let Tristan start.
and Tristan, I think, has got some.
It's a problem. But it is a problem, because if you think about the presentations we've had today, huge investment required for greenhouse gas and new technology engines and all the rest of that sort of stuff. Huge investments potentially for autonomy and various things like that. And the reason it is a problem is because the ship owner has also got this strange idea that he wants to make a profit. And ship owners have a tendency to go for the lowest bidder in a lot of things, and to try and find the cheapest way to do things. So I actually think it's a massive question. I'm not entirely sure how we square that circle. The amount of investment that there's going to be needed for example, autonomy, for greenhouse gas and all the rest of that sort of stuff, along with the fact that the ship owner wants to make a profit, and that ship owner's profit is dependent on a charterer. And that charterer quite often isn't that interested in the environmental details. He's subcontracted that to the ship owner. So there is no easy answer as far as I can see. And I'll let someone else take it. Anyone else willing to take the?
So the priority should be greenhouse gas emission reduction, obviously. I think that's the obvious answer. But in more seriousness, how do we do it? So. Well, one answer is for people to pay more attention to some of the work that IMarEST is doing, not just in the emissions SIG, but all of the SIGs. I don't know of many other organisations which are taking an approach to consolidate all these different topics, information needs from across so many different disciplines. Most of these issues that we've been talking about today are all messy, real-world problems that don't fit in scientific boxes, which is where a lot of research tends to still sit. And IMarEST is doing an excellent job at integrating that information. So obviously this is self-serving, and I'm trying to win brownie points from Bev and John, but there is a very obvious message about the value of the work IMarEST is doing, and the more we can do to support that, the more the industry can do to support IMarEST, the better, because it's in its own interest. I think the other way you can help is we need very clear and effective regulation, because a lot of the investment, I'm thinking primarily about greenhouse gas emissions, but actually all of these basic externalities, whether they're safety or environment related, that the industry has to tackle are unfortunately additional costs. So many of them are not going to happen without a regulatory driver. And as long as that regulatory driver is not clear, well-designed, cost-effective, simple, implementable, I'm thinking a bit about the slide that was put up around the human element and the increasing amount of IMO regulation, which some of the other SIGs are responsible for, but which is obviously creating risks from a safety perspective. There's circularity associated with that. But obviously that regulation just needs to be very well thought through, and IMarEST plays an essential role at IMO, and the more we can do to that role and the more we can produce good quality regulation, the better. And then my final point is just about finance investment. I'm quite positive on this because we continuously encounter very large amounts of capital that is just looking for somewhere to go. And the shipping industry could be a recipient of that, but it's at the moment looking like a risky investment to many people. There are lots of ship types, tankers, bulkers that carry coal, which don't have a very rosy future when you look at some of the future projections of commodity trend. When people will stop financing VLCCs because we won't need oil in that volume in the future is not something anyone knows, but it's a risk that investors are aware of and is going to affect the capital flow. But if we can identify very clean and sustainable pathways for investment, there's no sign that we're receiving that capital won't flow. There's trillions of dollars looking for a home. It just needs good long-term prospects. And I think working very closely with financial institutions, which is another integration of knowledge, something our group is doing very heavily. We do a lot of work with banks now, and could be a fourth pillar to a lot of the work that we've been discussing here.
Just going to add the obvious, which is we're increasing the number of technologies a mariner needs to handle. At the same time, we're reducing crews and talking about autonomous vessels. Those really are counter to one another. On these new technologies, I think they fall into two classes. One is it's going to save you money, or it's going to increase your capacity, so you're doing it for commercial reasons. And the second is it's required by regulations. Taking the ballast water, for example, no ship operator has a direct link to their bottom line for managing ballast water. It's strictly regulatorily driven. So on the uptake of those technologies, you need a level playing field. You need repeating what was stated there, you need very clear and enforceable regulations that are readily measured, and that's how you make sure that those technologies are taken up. The other technologies, they're impacting your bottom line, so whether it's from a carbon tax initiative that hits your bottom line that way, or it's from increased efficiency, you'll take up the technologies, for instance, on hull cleaning to reduce your fuel consumption.
Okay. Do we have any more comments from the panel? Okay, we'll come in with a second one here then. As a professional body, we strive to ensure we develop standards and competencies and support our members. How can we support countries and sectors where the understanding of, say, climate change or invasive species and regulation might be low? Anyone?
I'll have a go at that one. So in terms of biofouling, one of the things we can do is use our status with the IMO glow fouling project, where a lot of countries just don't have the resource to put together their own national biofouling management strategy, and that's fine, it's understandable. But what we can do is give them a ready-made template and understand a bit more about how they operate to allow them to comply with this international standard. So I think there's a lot we can do in terms of giving nations who haven't got the resource to develop their own standards, to give them the templates to fill in the boxes and then become globally compliant as well. So it's an administration exercise, but it's bringing everyone up to the same level.
Yeah, Ralph.
It's essentially, it's an outreach and education problem, and it's developing the tools that make that easy to do, and then finding the routes to take that to the right places. So it is all about engagement. It's all about finding the venues where the people that you need to influence are present and taking the message to them. I think one of the mistakes is that is often made is expecting the recipient of the message to come to you. It has to be the other way around. You have to go to the fora where the groups that you seek to influence are present, and then put the effort into delivering that message and providing them with the tools to take and use that message effectively.
Yeah, David, I think you had something to add.
Thank you. I'd echo those last two comments. Many of the international bodies, I talked about the International Seabed Authority, but the IMO as well, operate active registers of experts, and certainly from my perspective, the Institute have experts who could readily sit on many of these expert panels. So I think there's an open door that's ready to be pushed against in many of these areas, and that's a really good way of perhaps providing that sort of outreach and expertise to help developing nations.
Okay, super. Thank you, panel. Does anybody have any more comments on the Marcie.
Thank you. Similarly, I think that engaging with the regulated community is extremely important, and it seems to me one of the areas that as I've attended, industry events over the years, the shipping industry is often the least represented at these events, and they're the ones who have the largest implications and impacts. And so I think the collaboration and sharing of information with, like maybe through local chapters, and particularly supporting small developing nations in their collaborative efforts is really important. But I also think that education outreach is super important to engage with the industry that's most affected.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to take a chance now and open this up to the floor in London. So if anybody has any questions in the room here, John?
John Wills. John, 10 years ago I joined and was for 5 years technical director of the Institute. I've subsequently been 5 years on the council, and I have to say this has been the most stimulating 4 hours I've spent in the Institute in those 10 years. Congratulations. My second point is an observation. It's really to do with the emissions, and that presentation got me thinking. I live down on the south coast, halfway between Portsmouth and Southampton, and when we go for a walk with my friends across the Isle of Wight, it's quite interesting to be able to compare the naval dockyard in Portsmouth with warships alongside, and the faint emissions that might appear out of their funnels because they have shore supply electrical power, and the contrast in Southampton with the black smoke that's emitted out of the ships there because there is no cold ironing or shore supplies. I'm just interested in what direction commercial shipping ought to be going when it is in our harbours. Thank you.
Yeah, a good direct question. So I would first of all point to the Maritime 2050, which is a UK government's paper on the future of the industry, and I can't remember the specific language, but there's certainly very conscious awareness of the import emissions of merchant fleet ship.
Can certainly offer that in the United States on the West Coast, there is significant shoreside electrification, cold ironing of vessels that come in. One of the challenges is how do you standardize those connections so that as the vessels travel worldwide, they're able to have similar voltages, frequencies, and just the physical connection that comes up to the vessel. In addition, obviously we're entering into the low sulfur requirements worldwide, and that covers all areas, but we've already mentioned the emission control areas, because as you're walking down the beach, those particulates that are coming out of the stacks are impacting you because you as a population are quite close to the ports. So reducing the emissions at the dock is actually more important in terms of particulate matter, that black smoke that you're seeing coming out, as compared to when the vessel is transiting. So the sulfur restriction, sulfur's 80% of the particulate matter that comes out of stacks, that should be going away to a significant extent with the taking up of the 0.5% sulfur emissions there. So shoreside electrification is happening, and certainly the reduction of the sulfur is as well.
Sorry, I hate to disagree with a panel member, just because we've just done the maths on this. So PM10 certainly reduces with sulfur. PM 2.5, which is the smaller particulate matter particles, does not significantly reduce. And even the NOx regulation that we've got coming in with Tier 3 engines does not create significant reductions because it's only coming to the new build fleet. And so when you have demand growth, and unfortunately the UK projects demand growth and so does the global fleet, the NOx emissions are not going to be controlled by Tier 3. We're going to have something more, and the PM is not going to be controlled by SOx. At least PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is the really nasty stuff because it's the stuff that gets deeper into your lungs, gives us all pulmonary and cardiovascular problems. Sorry.
Okay, were there any more comments on the panel on that one, please? No, okay, super. And I'll take one more question in the room here.
I'm Jane Pillay, over 50 years in the maritime industry. Regarding deep sea mining, methane hydrates were not mentioned. Now, LNG, which is really essentially liquefied methane, is the intermediate cleaner fuel. Ideally, we should have hydrogen or nuclear, which has its dangers. The rumor is that there's about 400 years of LNG. And of course, what the industry don't tell you, the LNG industry, is LNG or methane is 26 times worse than CO2. So they try to hide that factor. And there's a lot what happens is called methane slip when they're used on engines. The highlight of my, I didn't fall asleep, which was excellent, or rather you all excellent speakers, but my highlight is, if you miss the moon, aim for the stars.
Okay. Yeah. Tristan.
I can talk on LNG and methane, but I don't want to be the only person who talks. Is there anyone else who wants to go first?
Can you be quick and then pass
okay,
it
I'll be
around?
super quick. On LNG, it's a high carbon fuel as well as a methane slip fuel, and you'll have noticed from my graph that it's a very small growth and then it declines. It's got about 10 years to have any growth in the shipping industry, and then it'll be in rapid decline because of the zero emission fuels that we need. So I think that we've had a narrative over the last few years, which is that LNG will be a significant part of the marine industry's future. I can't see that happening in any way, and most of the finance community that we work with can't either. But there are some investments that have already been made, and those will come in, but we'll probably see them decline. But it's difficult because so much work has already been done on the subject. But point noted.
Just a quick, just to take the pressure off you, just a quick comment about LNG as a fuel. That I chaired the motor ships LNG fueled ship conference for a number of years, and one of the major discussion points was the chicken and the egg. There's a chicken and the egg problem with LNG fueled ships. Who's going to buy an LNG ship if there isn't a global bunkering network? Who's going to build a global bunkering network if there isn't a pool of ships to sell it to? So the problem continues to be who goes first and who makes the investment first. And I think you do see companies like Shell are making investment in the bunkering network. But as I said, chicken and egg is the issue.
I'll comment on that from two perspectives. First of all, there is a modest level of investment in commercial exploitation of methane hydrates as a fuel, but I suspect it'll get left behind because the level of availability of natural gas from other sources is significantly lower cost at the moment. And then if you take the flip side of it, the biggest issue with methane hydrates, it's one of the wild cards in the climate debate. It's a wild card because no one can predict exactly what's going to happen, but of course there are extremely large volumes of methane locked into the seafloor in methane hydrates, and we have a warming ocean. So it's a fact that the ocean is warming. What is difficult to surmise is what is the impact of that warming on methane trapped in hydrates. It's a significant wild card that could introduce an additional level of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere.
Okay, super, thank you. I'm going to take a question from Slido now. And this is going to be for all the panelists, actually. The question is, technology is involved in all of the topics today. What is the single most significant technology for each of the panelists? If I can start the mic down at Gordon's end. Well, and then by the time it gets to Gordon, he'll have his answer.
You're probably not expecting me to say this, actually. It brought me, I was thinking about it when you were chatting, and it's about the impact of regulation. We all have a go at IMO an awful lot. It's a toothless tiger and there's no real influence. But in terms of the newest technology having an impact, I think exhaust gas cleaning systems, because ship owners have been forced to, through regulation, to try and clean up their act. Because ultimately it will affect the bottom line. So for me at the minute, in terms of reducing pollution, at least IMO through regulation has made some headway in terms of trying to act upon the problems we have in damaging our atmosphere and forcing ship owners to change through regulation.
I'm going to be really biased and say hydropower, because that's my background. Well, the tides aren't going anywhere. We know what they're doing. It's predictable. It's clean energy. And we've got progress to make, obviously, but there's a lot of things that we can learn. And I was just thinking while everyone's talking, and I was listening to you, but mostly I was thinking how good it is to have this knowledge transfer. We can't progress forward with these technologies or whatever our favourite technology is without learning from each other. So it's nice to have this platform, this opportunity to learn from each other, see where the issues are and how we can work together to address them. So thank you, SIGs. Thanks.
Yeah, of course, I'll stick with ballast water because that's the area I'm the geekiest in. So I'm not sure it's, of all of the issues that are facing the marine environment and the aquatic environments, and I'm not sure that I could say ballast water treatment systems are the most impactful technology. But what I've enjoyed seeing is the innovation of taking water treatment plants that are essentially made and generally designed for installation in land-based applications and marinizing them. That's been a really interesting aspect of, I'm not an engineer, but watching that process. And in my environmental background, having worked on lots of different land-based treatment systems, pump and treats for water, air emission controls in different environmental settings, I've really enjoyed seeing the innovation that's happened in the treatment, water treatment for ballast and the engineering that they have accomplished to put that on board a vessel. It's a very aggressive environment. And one of the things that Kevin mentioned in the contingencies was like TRO, some of the sensors. These are devices that are made for laboratories where it's a nice, steady environment. And we put them on board ships where it's not steady, it's aggressive. So again, I don't know if it's the most impactful for all of the environmental issues, but to me, watching the innovation there has been very, very interesting.
I guess I'm going to have two, because I want to just back up what Gordon said about exhaust gas scrubbers. Take it one step back and look at the black stuff that we put aboard ship and call it fuel, and think of the amount of time, effort, and energy that goes into purifiers and all the rest of that sort of stuff. And then once we've burned it, trying to get the stuff off out of the exhaust gas. Wouldn't it be great if we just didn't put that stuff on ships to start with? What a great idea that would be. But I guess the technology that keeps me awake at night really is automation. I sometimes think the automation is being developed for cheapness rather than for usability. And as we get more complex technologies coming along, they need to be better designed, and they need to use a buzzword, they need to be able to fail gracefully. Instead of collapsing in a heap, they need to start a failure process that's recognizable and allow somebody to be able to take them over. So to me, the technology I'd like to see advanced most is the idea of graceful failure of shipboard equipment. It is a thing, by the way.
Okay. Well, I would hesitate to choose a single technology because we're covering so many different dimensions here. But I think if we look at the environmental issues that we face in the oceans and on the land, I don't think there's any shortage of technological innovation to respond to those challenges. Indeed, I think most of the technology that's needed to respond to those challenges already exists. The shortage is in the ability to implement those technologies, either through policy or through investment. So that's where the real challenge is. It's not about a single game-changing technology. It's about implementation.
So very strongly agreeing it's about implementation, and we don't have to wait for some piece of magic. The technology that I would put forward is the electrolyzer. It's the building block of the hydrogen that you need in order to decarbonize marine fuels. So whether or not we're using ammonia, hydrogen, or synthetic methanol, you need a stream of zero emission production hydrogen, and that comes from renewable electricity with an electrolyzer, which is essentially a fuel cell operating in reverse.
So I'd second Ralph's comments first of all. But I think if I had to pick two within my area, I talked about in-water hull cleaning. There's been a massive rate of technology advance there, and we're really getting to a stage where we have a technology which can make the whole process much more environmentally acceptable and also acceptable from a human health point of view. But also, it's worth talking about the coatings again. Traditionally, marine coatings, if you couldn't put it in a can and you couldn't spray apply it, the industry wasn't interested. And you had teams of scientists furiously coming up with the next best anti-fouling technology, but if it didn't meet those two requirements, it was kind of null and void. But now things are changing, and actually people are looking beyond just spray apply coatings. How else can we actually keep surfaces clean? And that opens the door to a whole range of other opportunities, which is frankly quite exciting and can be applied to all sorts of marine infrastructure. So yeah, in-water hull cleaning and non-traditional coatings.
I'm going to say the most important technology is the human mind. The ballast water. So take ballast water. All these treatment systems, we're basically remediating water that we're taking on board that we don't necessarily need to take on board. We've just finished, in our group, we just finished designing a research vessel where all the ballasting is taking place from the wastewater that comes through the Blackwater system. It's a small vessel, but we're able to eliminate ballast water 100%. We're looking at container ships that we convert them to have locked in fresh water that we're able to transfer around. I've seen vessel designs for bulk liquid and bulk cargo that are ballast free. So by using the human mind as a technology, approaching these things holistically, how can we integrate out problems and eliminate the need for some of these technologies? So it's the human mind in terms of the naval architect, the marine engineer, the scientist, and the technologist.
How do you top that? I won't even try.
He said.
I think for me, from a deep sea mining context, I'm slightly torn between relatively low impact extraction technology. I talked about the riser pipe, I talked about the harvesting technology, versus genuinely low cost autonomous deep water observation systems. And I appreciate Ralph's comment that a lot of that technology exists. But having real-time environmental data that you can play alongside impact data from industry in remote locations requires autonomy, requires artificial intelligence. So the scientist in me, I think I'd go with the latter. It's the real-time, low-cost observation technology.
Okay.
And the human mind.
Some great answers. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. I'm going to take one more from the room in here. Please, down at the front.
Yeah, I'm Ganesan. As a member of the TLB, I would like to show appreciation. I'm very glad the six have done very well. Yeah, bravo to all of you for your fantastic presentations. My comment or question to you is, with all these regulatory requirements and and whatnot that's being put in place, it's going to have a big impact on shipping costs. So ship managers, as all of you are aware, are already faced with a lot of difficulties. They are struggling to implement these new requirements as they are being adopted and whatnot. Ballast water management, for example, that's been postponed so many times. And then you got emission controls, which are going to be in place in 2020. Are the shipping companies preparing themselves to be ready to comply with that requirements? You just got less than a year, or about a year to comply with that. They are struggling, and they are not really willing to spend that much money because it's going to have an impact on the bottom line of the shipping companies. So how can we, assist the shipping industry, to sort of manage the burden, the financial burden that is going to be faced by them to meet the challenges of these requirements? That's my question. Thanks.
I can't really comment on shipping, but I've just got the microphone very quickly. In my experience of regulation, the best regulation is where there's a true partnership between industry, government, and its regulators. And I think if that balance can be struck, it makes everybody's on the same page and everybody can strive to achieve the same goals, and it can work. I've seen it work on a number of occasions.
So it was like 6 o'clock in the morning a week ago, and I'm in my kitchen, and my phone rings. I pick it up, I answer the phone, and it was a bulk carrier that didn't have a ballast water treatment system on and just called in the U.S. and couldn't take cargo. And they're saying, what can we do? And it was a total nightmare. So that was a total breakdown, a complete failure. Regulations were promulgated, advertised, promoted, discussed, and here this vessel shows up unaware that it was supposed to have put a ballast water treatment system on. So it absolutely breaks down. The cost, the best cost we could find for them was transferring it to a barge for $300,000. So this is a bulk carrier that maybe makes $20,000 as a day rate, and there's 15 some odd days of lost revenue for this vessel to be able to take its cargo. So I hope others have better idea on how to make these happen, because right there, that's a collision, a complete failure to have this vessel show up meeting the requirements.
Well, of course, I've got the easy option here, haven't I? Good biofouling management saves the bottom line. So actually, it's actually should be one of the easier things to try and implement. By choosing coatings properly, maintaining hulls properly, the operational costs come down. So that should be an easy one. I guess there is a question here, though: is these vessels moving around the world, the commodities we're moving around, do we need to move all this stuff? Is it all worthwhile moving? I mean, there's a big cost to it. I think we need to look more carefully about what we're actually moving around, what needs to be moved around. And maybe draw some lines on that as well. Maybe a bit too deep too soon, I'm not sure.
I'm very sympathetic to the comment that you made. It's a real burden, the amount that is having to be kept up with just in the area of emissions, and that's before I think about everything everyone else is handling. I guess to be very sensitive to that is one thing. So when we're putting forward highfalutin ideas that are technically, scientifically sound, they need to think about the human element, and there's again further evidence as to why IMarEST is very competent at bringing that into the consideration. But anything more we can do on that is good. But it does occur to me that it could be the case that there's going to be quite a revolution in the commercial structure of the shipping industry over the next 10 to 15, 20 years, because the conventional structure of operation and ownership and management may not be able to succeed in keeping up with the rate of change, and then maybe we'll have a different model, and maybe some of the owners won't be able to get capital because they won't have the resources to manage this increasingly complex and scientifically sophisticated industry. It moves from the type of industry it is today to something with a different, and so I don't know what the answer is. Maybe more consolidation. I mean, there are sectors within the shipping industry that are enormously unconsolidated and represent opportunities for that. But I think that the sector needs to invest more in the management of its fleet and the operation of its fleet, given what we can see coming. And I hope that that only makes this better. Not because we design really complex regulation, because simple regulation should be the key part.
I think we touched on it earlier. I mean, fundamental to it is a level playing field in a regulatory environment, but everyone in this room knows how challenging that is once that regulatory environment spans national boundaries. So the function and role of international regulatory bodies and making that as effective as possible is where this has to come to pass.
I guess it's been alluded to already. I mean, low freight costs has been the sort of the engine that's driven globalization. The fact that we can move products cheaply from China to Europe has driven globalization. Quite often that low freight cost has been the result of bad decisions made in the marketplace. The shipping markets have a habit of collapsing roughly every 7 years or so. Ship owners almost invariably overbuild, and you then get a collapse. So what we've done is provided artificially low freight rates that's encouraged globalization, that's encouraged more emissions at sea, because we're carrying more stuff at sea. So something about the economic model in shipping is fundamentally wrong. And somehow or other, not just the charterer, but the end consumer has got to take a bigger share of the actual cost of us running an industry that is, is blue, to use the expression that we've been using over the day.
Yeah, that's exactly where I look at this from. I mean, there's several ways to answer this in my view, but I think as consumers, we need to realize, echoing off of what Tom said, what are we shipping and why are we shipping it? Why are we buying our, the things that we're buying, and why do we want them so cheap? So I think we need to look at it from ourselves as a consumer. Shipping industry has to remain a viable business. They can't operate for free. So I think looking at it from that way, and I'm willing as a consumer to pay a little bit more when I know that the goods are delivered in a way that's environmentally sustainable. Just like I'm willing to pay more for the vegetables from my local farmer. They might be more expensive, but I know that it's a more economically and environmentally sustainable. So I would encourage us to look at how we can support the shipping industry by being consumers and being willing to pay. There's a societal cost.
I would echo everyone's points, but we're here today to talk about the sustainable blue economy. It's important to keep that in mind, not only shipping, but maritime and all the sectors that come under IMarEST in the marine engineering, science and technology. I think we need to work together to try and see how we can achieve this, not only sort of within the UK, but internationally, and really take advantage of all the expertise and knowledge from all our members, our corporate members, to realise this.
I think shipping as a very conservative industry is probably ripe for change fairly soon, and disruption will happen probably in the next 10 to 20 years. You've got to look at the other people looking towards shipping, and if the likes of Amazon or if Elon Musk wanted to get into shipping, what would he do? He would fundamentally look at it and approach it very differently. So I think perhaps that shipping needs to take a bit more of a look at itself. It's still a bit like the Wild West to some extent, and not just because of the way the system's been built, but I think it will come to a point where there will be some major disruption, and that it fundamentally change in terms of the way it works.
Okay, super. Panel, thank you very much indeed for answering those questions. Very broad range. I realise you've all done brilliantly on keeping time. I've managed to overrun the time. So I'm going to ask you now to return to your seats. But on behalf of the whole of the TLB, I just want to say an enormous thank you to all our presenters today from our SIGs. The breadth and depth of the presentations has just been simply tremendous. I mean, from the very start, that view from Saturn, you know, all the way right through to the future of autonomy and autonomous vessels, it really is quite an eye-opener, and I hope everybody has enjoyed it. So please, if I can just ask everyone to show their appreciation again to the